You may have clicked on this video and assumed based on the title that I've played the original Persona 3 or any of its updated versions. While that's a safe assumption to make, it's not the case. Reload is my first experience with the story, gameplay, characters, and themes of Persona 3, and despite being a huge fan of P4 and 5, this remake seemed unremarkable in comparison. Now, this could be for a few reasons. It could be, on my part, a newfound series familiarity taking on a bit of fatigue. It could also be because this remake doesn't capture the spirit of the original. Or it might be because some of the follies in design, both returning issues and brand new ones. I can't say with absolute certainty which it is, but as I wrapped up my 70-hour playthrough of this title, I just can't help but to feel like something was missing. Some integral parts of the Persona formula that make the series so special just seem fumbled here. I think they struggled in preserving the original experience. At the same time, I feel some of the original's design choices have been improved upon in P4 and P5, making this one a bit disappointing to return to without a pair of nostalgia glasses. I want to be upfront and say that yes, that's a very negative way to introduce my thoughts on this game, but I want to be clear that I did enjoy this title and I still recommend it. In fact, I think it's a great starting place for newcomers to the series, owed to the game's relative ease, and for a chance to see where the series really came to be what it's most recognized as today. A game that balances social links and dungeon combat equally, unlike the first two Persona games. But as someone visiting Tatsumi Port Island for the first time, after having played Persona 4 and 5, I can't help but to feel like my expectations weren't quite met. I can appreciate what the original Persona 3 did for the series, but this modern rendition doesn't seem quite right. This is owed to the incredibly easy combat that removes tension, a relative boredom towards some of the social links, a serious sense of tonal whiplash, and perhaps most damning, a lack of time with the main party of characters. So, like I said, I just felt like something was missing, and I'm hoping that writing this review will help me figure out what it is, and I'd be thrilled to have you along, so let's get started. While gameplay is no slouch, Persona games are best defined by their stories and characters. After having played Persona 4 and 5 in recent years, it unfortunately feels like the members of SEES were a step back. Perhaps what was once a great starting point to introducing social links back in 2007 has now become a bit antiquated as the series has grown and changed. One of the most disappointing elements about Persona 3 Reload was how I failed to connect with the characters most core to the story. Junpei, Mitsuru, Akihiko, Ken, Aigis, Koromaru, Fuka, and Shinjiro. I was waiting for that sense of attachment to come on, but it just never did across my 70 hours with the game. The weeks of the calendar kept moving, and as I reached the latter days of November, I started to realize that those moments of connection were not coming, despite the game's efforts to draw emotion out of me in some scenes that aim for heartbreak. But before I get too far ahead of myself, let's set the structure, and be warned, there will be major spoilers from here on out. Oh, and this review does assume familiarity with the Persona series and P3 Reload, so keep that in mind. The game opens with the main character, a boy only here in the remake, transferring to Gekkoukan High on Tatsumi Port Island. After witnessing some seriously strange scenes, he enters the dorm where he will be staying and is greeted by a young child with blue hair. He signs a contract and is quickly integrated into dorm life. One night he awakens to a distressful scene. The dorm is being attacked by what everyone else is calling shadows. Our main character then awakens to their persona and defeats the shadows, saving his new friends in the process. Eventually, he is debriefed on the whole situation, the existence of shadows, the abilities of personas, and the ever-looming threat that is Tartarus, a maze-like dungeon full of shadows with unknown horrors waiting within. The goal becomes simple: to reach the deepest point of Tartarus and put a stop to what's known as the Dark Hour, the hour after midnight where Tartarus emerges and shadows run free. Very quickly into the game, a new goal emerges, to defeat 12 of the most powerful shadows that show up only on each month's full moon. This is supposed to bring about the end of the Dark Hour, saving the world from shadows. The days between are spent exploring Tartarus and forming new connections with friends, some old, some young, some guys, some girls, and so on and so forth. As the days go by, the number of your closest allies grow as new members join your shadow hunting task force. Twists and turns emerge along the way, accompanied by some villains and plot twists and moments of intended emotion. Overall, the villains are pretty underutilized. They aren't really characters themselves, they're more of just tools to keep the story moving, and that's definitely a weak point. But in the end, you of course come face to face with a godlike being who you must prevail against despite the overwhelming odds against you and your friends. And if you're familiar with the series at all, it's a lot of your run-of-the-mill stuff. You find this in many Persona games. And if it's your first time experiencing them, I'm sure it will be great. For me though, the series has grown in its approach to storytelling in the sequels following Persona 3. And so the moments of impact felt decidedly weaker here, despite having some more intended weight thematically and mechanically. So what's to blame for me not caring? Well, I think it comes down to three things: the pacing, the occasional fumbling of the theme, and the tonal whiplash. Starting with my first issue, and it's about how main cast members are introduced so quickly, and then how little opportunity you have to interact with their social links until much later. New party members are thrown in at breakneck speeds, and then their social links don't become available until much later, or their linked episodes are spaced out so greatly that you forget what happens in between. In other words, the bonds you forge with these characters aren't set up in a way that you can maximize your emotional connection with them, and that can spell doom for a Persona game. When a new character is introduced, I need to get to know them quickly, not farther down the road. So let me give some examples here. Despite meeting Mitsuru in the opening days, her social link doesn't become accessible until late November, almost 7 months into the game. You meet Aigis on a vacation trip to Yakushima in late July, but you won't be able to start her social link until January, leaving her to feel like just another person hanging out in the dorm for months on end. Meanwhile, party members like Shinjiro, Ken, and Koromaru are thrown into the party in a relatively short amount of time compared to characters in Persona 4 and 5, making it feel a bit overwhelming. This is particularly true of Ken, who's just dropped off by Ikutsuki on a random day, and then he's just there, chilling with you. Sure, eventually you do get those linked episodes with him, but this isn't until later in the story. And in the meantime, it just feels like you're not getting to know him at all. He's just some kid sitting there in the dorm with you. And then you have Junpei and Akihiko's linked episodes that are spaced out so far between the beginning and end of the game that I forgot what the hell was even going on the last time I hung out with those characters. I think it's most felt with these characters, but it is true of other party members as well. I just felt like I was never getting enough time to understand them for who they are as they went about their daily lives. And when I did, it was so much later into the experience, past the point of intrigue. Later Persona games corrected this by having arcs and dungeons that revolved around the character that was being introduced to the party that month. Characters like Kanji, Haru, Futaba, Naoto, and more. New characters are given a bit more spotlight, while the previous party members show off their personalities by clashing theirs with that of the new ones. It's a great formula, but Persona 3 hadn't quite reached that point yet, and the characters felt hollower to me as a result. It's like they're here to fight alongside of you, and that's it. Not enough story moments to tie them together as a group. Perhaps my expectations worked against me here, but we each bring our own experiences to a new game. Again, I think this is a great starting point, but not one that felt as impactful to return to after having played the sequels. And without this extra time to really get to know the characters, it left the moments of intended emotional gravitas without any weight or impact, outside of the ending. One of the coolest things about this game, compared to the latter Persona games, is the use of death as a thematic tool. To be clear, the main theme of Persona 3 is about finding purpose in one's life. It's about the struggle to find meaning for ourselves through the bonds we create and the choices we make, all while staving off the inevitability of death. It's about avoiding a life of nihilism and finding purpose for ourselves. They borderline beat you over the head with this message. The final boss is death itself after all, and yet the party fights back against it with all their might, choosing not to let the destination shape the journey of their lives. Persona games, at least the ones I've played, have always been life-affirming in this way, but Persona 3 really plays around with that idea much more than latter games by giving death a more prominent role in the story. Outside of death as a final boss, it's also an event that shapes the plot with many characters dying. Chidori, Ikutsuki, Shinjiro, Jin, Takaya, Mitsuru's father, seemingly Aigis at one point, as well as many off-screen characters like the protagonist's parents, Akihiko's sister, and Ken's mother. In this way, death looms over the story throughout every moment, ones that have already occurred, ones that we experience, and ones that might come in the future. Hell, even the main character dies at the end of the main story, succumbing to an illness after giving all their strength to fight Nyx, the Harbinger of Death, the final boss. This is the game's best use of death, as it comes right after everyone gets their memories back and remember the journey you shared with them, and how you all came together. It's so bittersweet, the gang is reunited, but it comes with the loss of their leader. You. The game is ending. Your time at Tatsumi Port Island is over, but in a way, it feels like it goes on for these characters. It's beautiful, and the result is one of the best video game endings I've experienced in a while. It could have been a lot better if I cared more about the characters, but it was still great. Death is everywhere in Persona 3 Reload, and it's the character's resiliency to fight through the pain that gives this title heart and soul, and that's mostly intact here in Reload, but I do think they miss the mark occasionally with their handling of it. Numerous characters outright die in this game, even a party member in the case of Shinjiro, and that is such a powerful narrative device to utilize, especially in video games. Think about it, a character you've come to know is killed off, never to return, and that carries real weight as you notice their absence both in the story as well as mechanically as you lose out on their power. But you only feel the impact of death roughly at like a 50% rate in Persona 3 Reload, as the lack of character building in the cases of Shinjiro, Takaya, Jin, Ikutsuki, as well as the cheapening of the moment in the case of Chidori, they all leave death feeling not as impactful as it should. I mean, you just aren't given enough time to really learn about these people, especially Shinjiro. He isn't brought into the party soon enough to get you to care. You feel his power mechanically as he's a super strong ally in Tartarus, but without the character depth, his death just felt hollow to me. And this is triply true because it's tied in so closely with Ken and Akihiko's stories, characters who I felt like I was barely getting to know, especially Ken. So this moment, despite the heaviness, just didn't land for me, as it felt like a moment between strangers rather than one shared amongst all my closest friends. Death is also used in the case of Chidori, an enemy turned lover to Junpei. This at least has a little bit more build-up as we're shown cutscenes to the main story of these two becoming closer, although it does feel artificial. This chapter of love seemingly ends though with Chidori sacrificing herself to save Junpei after he's shot. And damn, that was a pretty touching moment. I mean, there's no bigger display of love than giving up your own life for your partner. It seems to have a lasting impact on Junpei, who is left devastated, but comes to appreciate the sacrifice of his partner, and it's just so touching and sentimental. Oh, wait, never mind, he's going gaga over the girls in the kimonos now. Guess it didn't mean as much as I thought. Oh, and what's this? I did an event that results in Chidori coming back to life? Well, guess that death was a bit less meaningful than I thought. Oh well. And then there's Jin and Takaya, two characters who have spent the whole game antagonizing the party in major ways, killing Shinjiro and nearly disposing of Junpei. But then you come face to face with them before Nyx, and they are total pushovers. who mostly go out with a whimper, making their deaths and overall purpose in the story feel like filler. Another tool of villainy to carry out the plot and nothing more. Ugh. Death can have such an impact in storytelling, and while Persona 3 utilizes it, it does stumble with it at times, and I think that ties back into the first problem. Death carries more weight when you've been given ample time to really learn and care about the characters, and I don't think Persona 3 offers enough time or opportunity to get you on board with that. At least it didn't for me. Perhaps I'd feel different if I played the original though, because I think another reason why it felt so off here was because of a few presentational choices. And that leads me to my third and final issue with the storytelling here, the occasional tonal whiplash. There's so many instances where dark events take place, which, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of. I think later Persona games could have used more of this: betrayal, deaths, mourning, and chaos. But Persona 3 Reload doesn't let those things linger long enough. After finishing up Shinjiro's linked episodes, a somber moment of realizing a friend was gone forever, you leave his room and you only hear the goofy and the upbeat music return, which immediately sucks away the emotional weight of the scene you just saw. After Ikutsuki's betrayal, a moment that isn't built up or given enough time to shine despite being super predictable, you just go back to your daily life as if nothing happened. Like, yep, this character that was supposed to be our overseer just betrayed us, he murdered Mitsuru's father, he turned Aigis against us, and then died. Wow, what a moment. Oh well, back to sewing with Bebe now. I don't know, it's like the game tries to cram in these moments of emotional depth and impact without building them up, and then just glossing over the consequences of those events shortly after. It just feels like they didn't get the balance right between the pacing and the emotional tones, and in the end, I just never came to care. And in a Persona game, that can be absolutely damning. I came to like the characters, especially within the game's final few hours, but I never came to appreciate them in the same way that I had with Chie, Teddy, Ryoji, An, Futaba, and so many more. So, despite the strong use of death as a theme, it didn't land as well as it could have. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that this makes Persona 3 a bad game. Yes, I still enjoyed my time playing it and getting to know these party members as much as the game would let me. There were moments that stood out to me that I will remember. Getting to hang out with an animal party member who was just that, an animal, was super cool. Kuromaru obviously gets a lot of personality forced onto him through learning about his backstory, but it was still neat to see the idea of man's best friend played out in full. I also enjoyed Junpei's jealousy throughout the story. He's always just a bit wishful that he was you, always wanting to be the leader despite falling short time and time again. It's part of his personality, not an arc he goes on to overcome it, but a trait that always lingers, informing me on who he is, flaws and all. And despite it taking forever to unlock her social link, I really appreciated Aigis' struggle to connect with her humanity. It was allegorical with social anxiety and the despair a person can feel over their inability to connect with others easily. These were great moments, but they weren't enough to uplift the main events of the plot. I really needed more from the characters early in the experience to get me to connect with them, and without that strong foundation, the rest of the story built onto it just saw me failing to connect and invest fully. Characters eventually began to grow and change as the events of the plot shaped them, but it was too little too late for me to care, after dozens and dozens of hours of very little connection. I was never really mad or upset because of this, and I never ever disliked the title, I just didn't connect with it as strongly as other Persona experiences. It just felt disappointing when it came to its characters and story. Perhaps these are problems with the original too, and if that's the case, it's a shame the remake couldn't clean them up a little bit. Alright, let's shift focus now to the gameplay side of things, examining the two major pillars, the social links and the combat. Starting with the social links, and I found them to be a mixed bag. Some that I really connected with, and others that fell completely flat, or worse, were nonsensical. To be fair, I think there's a great level of subjectivity here, as your own life experiences may shape how you view the different struggles that these companions are facing. Regardless though, one thing I appreciated about all the social links is the inclusion of voice acting for all of them. Every major rank in a social link includes fully voiced character lines, and that's amazing. It really made some of these characters come to life far more than they would have as stagnant text boxes. Starting with the good, and I think some of the better social links in the game are the ones that tie back into the overall theme of purpose versus nihilism and life versus death. Without question, my favorite social link in the game was that of Akinari, a young man with a severe genetic disease that will see him dying before reaching full adulthood. In the opening ranks, it's clear he's accepted his fate, but is turned off by the reaction of others, all of whom pity him instead of getting to know him. But as you advance the link, he opens up more and more, even going so far as to tell you about his love of reading and how he's decided to write his own book. You help him through the writing process, giving him honest feedback while treating him as any other person instead of one you look to with pity. In the end, he finishes his story, a tale that reflects his own life experience, and in this way, he comes to peace with his illness, knowing that he's made a friend that will remember him for who he was instead of for his sickness. It's a very touching and poignant reminder to see people for who they are instead of for the things that have affected them. Another great one in my mind was that of the Gourmet King, Nozomi Suemitsu. He's living with a big inferiority complex after growing up always being compared to a brother who seemed to be doing better than him at everything. One day though, Nozomi's twin died, and the passing left Nozomi in a state of deep depression. Not necessarily because of his brother's death, but because he felt some relief from it, that the comparisons would stop. This obviously bad state of mind left Nozomi with a sense of guilt as well, being overly aware of himself to a fault. You help him through this despite how often he projects his feelings of being lesser upon you to boost himself up. In the end though, he comes to realize his mistakes and vows on working on himself and overcoming his struggles to grow as a person. It's a good message about the importance of not comparing ourselves to others and how important it can be to get out of our own heads. One last one I appreciated was that of the old couple who own a bookstore together. As you get to know them more, you learn that they had a son, a teacher, who died. He was beloved by his students, and a persimmon tree was planted at the high school in his memory. How you can find the damn tree in the courtyard, which helps with the world building. Most of the middle ranks are centered on their efforts to preserve the tree after it's threatened with being cut down. You see how much the tree means to the couple as a symbol for their son's life. But surprisingly, in the end, they agree that the tree should be cut down to make way for a new wing of the school to be built. They admit to themselves that the tree was just a way of hanging on to pain, and that preserving it meant costing students a chance at more educational resources, something their son would not have wanted. They make the extremely tough choice to let go of this comfort object as a tribute to their son's wishes, in a way preserving his values as an educator over their own attachment as parents. It's very touching, and it does end on a happy note. Now, there were others that I liked as well, like the old drunk monk. I thought his ramblings were hilarious, but I think you get the point. Meanwhile, some of the other social links didn't quite land as well. Not that they were bad, but just that they didn't quite hit home with their meaning, at least to me. I never could truly tell Mamoru and Kaizushi apart. They both felt interchangeable with one another, perhaps because they're both track team members. Yuko's link about discovering a passion for her life didn't really strike me either. Meanwhile, the link with Maya, an online friend, seemed to be nothing more than a wink and nod that the student and teacher had a relationship outside of school. Oh, and Bebe, what a disappointment. Did not like this guy very much. They did a good job of tying in death to his social link, as he loses his aunt that supported him, but after that, it just feels like every rank is him sewing up a kimono, and then he leaves. Ugh. There were numerous ones like this that I just found to be on the boring side. And finally, we have some that seem completely illogical, especially that of Tanaka, Maiko, and sadly, Mitsuru. Tanaka of the TV show Tanaka's Amazing Commodities is a selfish businessman who pretty much scams you to start the social link. You give him a lot of money, twice, and eventually he agrees to give you business advice in exchange. He goes on a monologue every time you meet with him, and it feels like you're hardly doing anything besides standing there listening to him yap. And then he ends up becoming a little bit of a softer person as a result of talking to you, and I don't know, it just didn't work at all. It felt like I was contributing nothing as a player. Like I was just standing there and he was monologuing and I was like, yup. And that was good enough for him to change. I guess you can say that about some of the other social links too, but this alleged growth for Tanaka, it just didn't feel natural at all. Completely uneventful. Meanwhile, Maiko's has a nice sentiment to it. It's about a child learning to deal with a parent's divorce, but it comes off as nonsensical. Maiko herself suffers from the child being written by an adult problem. There were a few instances in which she spoke like a cognitively complete adult instead of as a youth. She seemed to recognize, remember, and reflect on things more than a child of her age would, and the way she spoke mirrored that, and I just didn't buy it at all. It left the whole social link feeling contrived instead of natural, and it also ends in the most uncomfortable way with a small child giving you a kiss on the cheek. I don't know, I guess it's not uncommon for young children to have crushes, but this went a bit too far for me. And then we get to our main party, and let's start with another stinker, Mitsuru. My god, why is she the most underdeveloped of anyone in the party? Her social link isn't available until after her father dies late in the story. The whole time she's been a stoic, confident, and mature character, and then you start her social link and it's all about how she struggles to fit in with the everyday life of a teenager. Like, I get it. She's the daughter of a major corporation CEO. She's lived a sheltered and protected life, where she took advantage of every opportunity to get ahead, but in the process, she lost out on the adventures and memories that define a fun childhood. It's a decent starting point, but they lost me right away when the first rank sees her unable to order ramen for herself. They make her too naive to the world around her, making the book smarts versus street smarts motif feel completely shallow. Hell, another rank even doubles down on this, as she's overly thankful that you helped her order a Big Mac. Oh, and then one time you take her to the movies, and it's a good old time, and then I return to the dorm for the evening portion of the day, and she was just talking about how we were all gonna die. I know that was a random chance given the day that I chose to do the social link, but man, that was even more tonal whiplash. I don't know, they lost me with this one by dumbing down the character too much, over-exaggerating her naivety towards the world, making a once brilliant character seem kinda pathetic. As for the rest of the party, we have social links with Aigis, Yukari, and Fuka. Fuka's was a bit hit or miss for me, and Yukari's was a little bit better as she processes her trauma and the broken relationship with her mother. However, it was Aigis's that stood out to me as being the best. I wish I could have started it much earlier because up until the rank 1 starting point in January, I really didn't care about her at all, but I did come to appreciate her a ton in the game's final month. Her struggle is so core to the game's overall theme, finding purpose. She awakens to her humanity, but struggles with her identity, unable to bridge the gap between being a machine and becoming fully human. I already mentioned how it's very relatable for anyone struggling with social anxiety, and I think it's handled very well. So overall, we did have some good ones within the party, you just had to wait for them. I was surprised to learn that the male characters of Seas don't have social links in the original game, but Reload seeks to make up for that a bit with the introduction of linked episodes. Akihiko, Junpei, Ken, Koromaru, Ryoji, and Shinjiro all get a series of about 4 or 5 episodes where these characters are expanded on. These are going to be appreciated by anyone who played the original Persona 3, as they give you a chance to interact more with the party members. While I did appreciate the attempt as well, my gripe came in how far apart they are spaced. And because they are about half as long as normal social links, I often found myself forgetting what happened or what was discussed the previous time I had hung out with these characters. This was particularly true of Akihiko's linked episodes, where it felt like we were just getting in fights every single time. It all blurred together. But the others all contained moments that I did enjoy, like getting to know Ryoji more on the shorelines during vacation, coming to understand Koromaru's backstory, fleshing out Aragaki's guilt and pain, and seeing Junpei take on a mentorship role with Ken. My overall complaint with these was their structure and frequency, not necessarily their content. And I should note that Reload offers up more opportunities to spend time with all the party members in the form of evening hangouts. These see you doing things like watching movies, preparing food, reading, gardening, or making coffee with some of your friends. Ultimately though, they don't provide a ton of new character depth and are more focused on unlocking new abilities for those companions in combat. And some of these go a long way in making fights even easier than they already were, like Yukari's that let me reduce the SP cost of her healing moves. That aside, the original seemed to have a real problem with the lack of things to do in the evening, so this does help mitigate that fatigue, and I commend the team for that. So, overall, I found the social links to be on point with the other two Persona games that feature them. Some of them were excellent, some were a bit mid, and a few stinkers. However, what makes me end up calling this the weakest batch in the series is how many of the ones relating to party members are either weak or introduced way too far in the game, after the point in which you feel like you could have cared. The characters are there, but the bonds aren't during the opening months, and it leaves them high and dry over the course of the game. So, can the combat and dungeon design provide enough oomph to allow this remake to shine? Well, while it's by no means bad, its major problem is a lack of difficulty owed to the number of tools and advantages the player is given while wandering around Tartarus. Tartarus is of course the only dungeon found in Persona 3. Unlike Persona 4's different themed dungeons and the completely unique levels found in Persona 5's dungeons, P3 only has one. This giant looming tower of death hanging over the school during the dark hour is the only place you'll spend time leveling up your party while ascending to its highest floor. There are a few other really minor dungeon areas during the story, but Tartarus is the focus here. However, it almost feels like the team didn't have enough confidence in the original Tartarus, as it feels like it and combat itself has been Persona 5. That is to say that it's full of flashier combat, tons of quality of life improvements mechanically, and a new set of tools that makes combat laughably easy in 95% of the encounters. It's also been dressed up, like they knew the handmade dungeons of P5 would have a leg up on this in most players' minds. As a result, it can feel like a desperate attempt to gain the approval of the newer audience that was brought in by Persona 5. That includes me, by the way, but even I wish that Reload was a bit more faithful to the original game, mechanically speaking. The influence that P5 has had on this title is undeniable. Hell, as I'm recording it, they just announced that there'll be a Joker fight as part of the DLC, so yeah, we got that now I guess, but it really is found in every component of the game, and it remains true in Tartarus. They P5'd it. So, in terms of level design, many of Tartarus's floors are randomly generated, full of dead ends with treasure chests, loops to keep you searching, shadows roaming everywhere, and a set of stairs to take you up to the next level to do the whole thing over again. There's 6 different blocks, and each of these is identified by their drastically different look and feel. In Reload, I would say these different areas look pretty good, although it did become super easy to recognize their patterns after a while. Yes, they are randomly generated, but there's only so many puzzle pieces for the generator to pull from, and it won't take you long to notice it, but there is a lot thrown in to break up the monotony. To be clear, I'm not sure how many of these are new additions versus returning features, but they include things like finding lost NPCs, having some floors being completely blacked out, featuring shadows that have a status effect, having giant gold hands that you chase down for lots of rewards, and more. They really didn't want Tartarus to feel stale, and I think these additions do a bit to help alleviate that, although it never allows this tower of doom and gloom to reach the same levels of enjoyment that I got from Persona 5's handcrafted dungeons. But overall, they did a good job. Tartarus could have easily felt like a slog, but it didn't. They increment it too so that you can't do it all in one go during the opening month, which means the monotony really never builds up too much. But what's the main thing you'll do in Tartarus? Well, fight of course, and I think that's where I felt the most problems existed. In the original Persona 3, you had very little control over your party members. You could set a preference for them, like attacking or supporting you with heals, but what they did was determined by the AI. That is no longer the case in Reload, as you take complete control over the party. This was brought over from Persona 5, but it is a change to the One More system that I do want to praise. It just feels nice to be able to make the choices for myself. All the wins and all the losses come on the heels of the choices you make, and that's awesome. However, you're going to be seeing a lot more wins than losses, and those wins aren't necessarily going to push your gaming prowess while playing on normal difficulty like I did. Having full control over your party, along with the character who can switch between different elemental attacks using different personas, means that it's very easy to strike an opponent's weakness and knock down an entire group of shadows, leading to an all-out attack opportunity that does a lot of damage. This would be enough of an advantage on its own, much like it was in Persona 5, but Reload tips the scales even further with many new gameplay additions. First up, before the fighting even begins, we have so many tools to avoid fights altogether. The team can dash in this game, unlike the original, meaning many fights can just be sprinted right past. Also, when you open up a treasure chest in Tartarus, it will force any shadow that was chasing you to despawn. So if you do get noticed, just open a chest, boom, problem solved. Fuka, our navigator, also has an incredible number of tools that can make floors trivial. This includes giving you buffs at the beginning of a battle, mapping out the entire floor you're on so you can just sprint to the exit, teleporting you back to the entrance to restock on heals and SP, jamming your location so that enemies won't detect you, and more. Sure, these moves cost a serious chunk of her SP to use, but doing so will allow you to blank the challenge on the current floor, and SP is not hard to recover in this game. And it's all sort of head scratching because it's not like combat is that difficult to begin with. I found myself avoiding a lot of these abilities simply because it felt like overkill. Maybe on the harder difficulties they were more balanced, but on normal, they're a joke. When it came to exploring Tartarus, it feels like you only fight shadows when you actually want to, not because they press the issue. On top of that, there's plenty of opportunity to heal up and recover SP while finding tons of new items and equipment to help you out. And not to mention the ability to level up party members that you aren't using for free if the RNG rewards you with the giant clock room. Like, holy crap, what else? Oh, yeah, Fuka will often warn you when a boss fight is upcoming, encouraging you to leave if you don't have enough resources. So hopefully that makes it clear. There are a ton of ways to either avoid fights or restock your resources so that you're good to go. It's a bit overkill. But when combat does actually begin, don't worry, it's still a breeze. I've already mentioned how the main character's ability to switch personas to utilize a variety of elemental attacks gives you a huge advantage. But Persona 3 Reload takes it even further by introducing Theurgy abilities. These are special moves that each character can use upon filling a bar by performing specific tasks. For example, Yukari's bar fills when she uses moves that heal the party, and Ken's will increase if he has less than half of his SP available. For many characters, it's quite easy to fill their Theurgy bars over the course of a few battles, and once it's charged, it can be used to give the party incredible buffs or heals, or used to deal a ton of damage to the enemy. And we're talking like 10 to 20 times more damage than a regular hit, if not more in some cases. It can really trivialize fights because you aren't limited in how many Theurgy abilities you can use per battle, and they also carry over between battles. So as a result, some of the Gatekeeper bosses, ones who are intended to be harder, become pushovers as you annihilate their health bar by using 4 Theurgy attacks in a row that you saved up. I mean, regular fights aren't taxing, so it's definitely possible to save up those abilities for the Gatekeeper fights, and it just trivializes them sadly. The only time I felt challenged was when I entered the Monad doors. These are passageways that contain harder enemies and reward you with great items and weapons. There's some tough fights to be found here, which is good, but they do remain completely optional and therefore avoidable. The point here is, if you want Persona 3 Reload to challenge you at all, play on a harder difficulty because normal is far too easy without setting any limitations for yourself. You'll be able to breeze past many enemies and given various tools to avoid fighting altogether. And when the action does start, you won't often be asked to make tough choices on what to do because of how many advantages you have over the enemies. Of the 3 Persona games I played, this is the one where combat disappointed me the most, despite it being flashy and fast. It was a lot of style, but it just didn't have the substance to make it engaging. And that brings us to the presentation, and honestly, it puts me in a bit of a conundrum, at least when it comes to the graphics. Obviously, Persona 3 Reload looks mostly immaculate with better lighting, brighter colors, the sparkling UI and menu systems, and the great animations in combat. It's clear to see that a lot of work went into this, and they didn't just half-ass it and settle for decent. The look of Tartarus is foreboding, especially on the ground floor with the giant staircase. It just looms over you in the same way the giant tower itself does. I also found the main areas to look good as well. All of them had their own atmosphere and style, but I do wish they felt a little bit more cohesive rather than separated. As they are, it feels like you're just leaping between different background areas instead of being part of a greater world, like in Persona 4 and even 5. Still, everything looked pretty great, even the side areas that you only visit one time, like Yakushima and Kyoto. So yeah, the game looks genuinely pretty good, although I will admit the first floor of the dormitory does come off as a bit plasticky for some reason. It's a shame because this is one of the areas you'll be spending the most amount of time in. Maybe it's the green carpet or the way these random patterns on the floor don't mesh well. I don't know, it just all looks really tacky, like it's an interior designer's nightmare, but maybe that was intentional, I'm not sure. I've seen college dorms, I lived in one. Sometimes they look rough. Anyway, a few nitpicks, but for the most part, I think they did well. My main issue though with the game graphically is that all of these improvements do detract from the game's atmosphere. A lot of people have spoke online about how the original P3 was so moody, owed to the darker atmosphere. Even watching back old footage of the game, a lot of that comes through still. It always seems like something dark is on the horizon based solely on the presentational decisions themselves. The game, its areas, and its character designs suggested a darkness that hung over this island, and that's just been completely lost in Reload. Everything is more upbeat stylistically, and the loss of that atmosphere is going to be noticeable for returning fans. I imagine that has to be true if I noticed it without even having played the original. And I think that's a major problem when it comes to preserving the original intent in as many ways as possible. The quality of life improvements are one thing to meet the expectations of a modern audience, but losing out on the gritty mood is certainly a pitfall of this remake. I want to be clear on the importance of that point, because outside of that, it obviously received a major facelift compared to the original game, and it does look great, but you will miss that atmosphere. As you might expect from any Persona game, the music is upbeat and catchy, and when it's not ruining the moment tonally, it is a joy to listen to. I still like P4 and 5 soundtrack more than this, but this one definitely has its hits. Mass Destruction as the battle theme of course jumps out as a classic, but Changing Seasons was my personal favorite. It starts playing on September 1st in-game, and every time I started a new day, I found myself listening to the opening portion of the song and just really enjoying it. And then you have Memories of the City that starts playing in January. It's a sad and somber piano tune that captures that end-of-the-world feel. And of course, the opening song that plays each time you load up the game, Full Moon, Full Life, is super catchy as well. Another great soundtrack put together by the Persona team and its varied composers. I mentioned it earlier, but it's incredible how much of a difference it makes to have fully voice-acted social links. There's tons of characters whose social links you won't finish without a guide, but if they have a voice actor every time you see them, you at least get a better understanding of their character. The way someone speaks conveys a lot about their personality, and I felt that many of the voice actors did a phenomenal job, especially in those social links that I highlighted as my favorites earlier. I also want to point out how much pizzazz and flair has been added to the combat system simply from presentational enhancements. The stylized menus, the exclamation points that pop up with a distinct sound effect every time you pick a move that an opponent is weak to, the side glance characters give to each other while performing a shift, and the music that accompanies it all brings an excitement to each fight. Again, I do think it robs a little bit of the original's atmosphere, but it is pretty good. It's a shame that it ends up being more style than substance, owed to that easy combat, but I still think it's worth praising overall. In a way, it elevates the combat system by providing a distraction from the relative lack of mechanical depth and overall challenge. When it comes to bugs and glitches, I had virtually none of that throughout my playthrough on a PlayStation 5. I had no hard crashes, no noticeable frame rate drops, and nothing that really sucked me out of the experience technically. There was one instance where a character sort of glitched out when I opened a treasure chest, and I wasn't recording at the time so I can't show you that, but that was it. So truly, from a technical point of view, a very polished and complete experience found here. And I'm not sure where else to touch on this in the video, but I did want to note that I'm not a big fan of this game's approach to DLC. They announced that Reload was supposed to be the complete experience, and then they offered up a season pass that includes Aegis's DLC called The Answer. After really connecting with Aegis's social link, I was curious to learn more, and when I uncovered how substantial a piece they left out, it left me disappointed. Now, if I want to play through it, I'll have to pay additional money on top of my original purchase, which does feel a little bit slimy. It's not too egregious, but it certainly could have been included in the remake's base form, especially since they said this was the complete experience. So that aside, we have a very polished game, but it is definitely one that's been Persona 5'd. Some will see that as an addition, some will see that as a subtraction, depends on your perspective. But it is undeniable to see the influence brought from that 5th title back into this 3rd one. And yeah, it's gonna either create a weird dissonance for you, or you'll just be happy because menu looks good. For me, I think it did lead to more of the tonal inconsistency, and that was certainly a big factor why I didn't enjoy this game as much as Persona 4 and 5. It's like it wanted to be a dark and gloomy tale, but couldn't commit to it fully, owed to some of the presentational changes. And I'm sure that upset a lot of fans. For me, it just meant a weaker experience than I was hoping for, a hodgepodge of 2 different ways to present a Persona title. I guess in the end, my overall take on Persona 3 Reload is that it had a chance for greatness, but it stumbled enough to leave the game feeling lesser. It's still an excellent video game, but to me, it wasn't a great Persona experience, at least based on what I've come to know. It's like every time the game takes a step forward, it also takes 2 steps back. They revamped the combat, pumping in tons of quality of life improvements while giving the player more control, but they added a bit too much with the Theurgy and Fuka abilities, so Tartarus is trivialized. Mechanically, it just never feels like the daunting and foreboding gauntlet that it's meant to be. Meanwhile, the story uses death as a narrative tool far greater than most other games, but it too often cheapens its impact by not building up characters or reversing it. Also, some of the party members are awesome, but by the time you get to know that, the game has already gone on for dozens and dozens of hours. And while Reload has certainly been modernized and looks incredible, it's easy to tell that the original strong sense of atmosphere has been partially lost here. So yeah, every good idea or implementation is held back by something that weakens the overall experience. I do think those good ideas and steps forward are enough to warrant a purchase of this title. it's still a quality game after all, but it's one that I imagine many die-hard Persona 3 fans may have been a bit disappointed with. I came to that conclusion because it's a sentiment I share after hearing how dark and gritty Persona 3 originally was, only to see that element of the game neutered. Like I said, I still recommend checking this game out, but for me, it just makes me want to play the original and see how the experience actually was. As for Reload, my central premise of this video was trying to identify what was missing. What was it about this remake that prevented me from connecting with it in the same way I had with Persona 4 and 5? Unfortunately, I've come to the conclusion that it was a few things. Weaker combat, tonal inconsistency, a confused atmosphere, not enough time with the characters, and more. While I never look at my time with this game as a waste, I'll always be enamored with the what ifs. What if party member social links started earlier? What if the game didn't feel the need to include the flashy theurgy abilities? What if the villains had been more developed? What if the dread-filled atmosphere had been maintained? And what if Mitsuru knew how to order ramen? I've been perhaps harsher on this title than was necessary because it's still a good experience, just not a great Persona one. If you're brand new to the series, it's a great jumping on point that can be built upon by playing the other titles afterward, but if you're like me and have played the other games and you want to experience 3 for the first time, it might be better to just play the original or Fez if possible. This one just left me wanting more. Satisfied, but not enthused. Thanks for watching. Alright y'all, what did you think of Persona 3 Reload? If you've played both the original and the remake, I'm really curious if you feel like the original game has been maintained here, particularly in regards to mood, tone, atmosphere, and difficulty. As for upcoming videos, I'm going to be reviewing Star Wars Outlaws, The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, Metaphor ReFantazio, which I'm absolutely hyped for, and Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, which I'm absolutely hyped for as well. I imagine those 4 games will dominate the channel as we move into the back half of 2024, but who knows, other things could pop up. On another note, I did make the choice to shut down the Discord channel. It really didn't take off how I thought it would, even after 2 years, and even myself, I've been super inactive on it, using it mostly just to promote new videos. I haven't taken the time to learn how the platform works, so I'm not entirely sure how I'd even maintain it if it did take off. We also had someone come into it and mess around, adding some copies of their account to the server a while back, and that gave me security concerns for myself and for everyone in it, and I haven't had the time to police it, and as the channel grows, I don't want something associated with the channel to go unchecked and unregulated, and since I'm kind of uninformed about it, I decided it was probably best to just shut it down, at least for now. So that's what I did. I batted around the idea for the last few months, and yeah, unfortunately, it will be gone. You can always reach out to me on Twitter, though, at NopeNapNarp for updates and general questions. And at some point, I might start a Patreon to interact with you all more there. Not sure about that, but for now, I do have the Twitter. And yeah, that seems to be my style. As always, I appreciate your continued patience and understanding. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Consider subscribing for more. Follow me on Twitter at NopeNapNarp. And as always, have a nice day and take care.